Hello, and welcome to a new season of Interpreting India. Geopolitical realignments, sustainable growth, healthcare financing, inclusive digital transformations, climate change, supply chain disruptions, urbanization, and several other critical global matters envelop the world today as India holds the G20 presidency. We at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. The role of the private sector in facilitating the climate transition journey of our world has been much talked about recently. While many corporations, including those in the fossil fuel sectors directly and otherwise, have started drafting out their own journeys to net zero, Ajay Banga, the newly appointed president of the World Bank, has also emphasized the need for active private sector finance contributions in the climate transition. There is a growing realization that governments alone cannot do all that is needed to be done to prevent the worst case scenarios that the world is increasingly faced with. And yet, the full scope of how the private sector can actually expedite this once in an era transition has not been explored enough. What can the private sector contribute beyond just committing to net zero timelines? What role will science, R&D, and technological innovations by private sector corporations play in our climate transition? How are companies planning out their own net zero journeys, and what are the key obstacles and risks they encounter as they embark on this process? Is there alignment globally amongst private sector companies in this direction, or are we seeing a lot of greenwashing? How can governments best engage with the private sector to ensure that efforts are aligned and coordinated? Joining us today to discuss these questions and the role of the private sector in the climate transition broadly is Mr. Suresh Narayanan. Mr. Narayanan is the chairman and managing director of Nestle India Limited. He has been in this role since August 2015. He also serves as the chairman of CII's National Committee on Food Processing Industries. Under Mr. Narayanan's leadership, Nestle India has received several accolades, including most recently MNC in India of the Year by All India Management Association, Outstanding Company of the Year by CNBC TV 18, and MNC of the Year by Business Standard in 2020. Mr. Narayanan joined Nestle in 1999 as Executive Vice President for Sales in India, and his career has then commenced from Nestle Indochina in 2003 to stints in the Philippines, Singapore, Egypt, and many other parts of the world. I could go on, but we'll cover a bit of his personal journey in the podcast itself. So, Mr. Narayanan, welcome to Interpreting India. We're delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you, Anirudh. Thank you very much. Very nice to be with you and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so I think, Mr. Narayanan, first of all, thanks for obviously being with us here. When we met for dinner, I said now probably a few months ago, I think we had a great initial conversation around the climate transition that is underway in the world, the role the private sector is starting to play in that transition, even though we hear mostly from governments during G20 conversations, COP negotiations, etc. It's clear that the private sector will have a very, very significant role to play in that. So I'm looking forward to speaking to you about both the private sector, but also Nestle in particular, and the thought process and the strategy that's being put into place to meet net zero targets, etc. And of course, talk about India as well, in particular in this climate transition journey, how India is going to evolve in its own path. But first, why don't we start off, just to kick things off, with a little bit about your journey. Right, you've worked obviously with Nestle for many years now. I think we can say decades, and with some other consumer products companies also in the past. But would love to hear, just as you reflect back on your career in the consumer FMCG space, just a couple of highlights, a couple of good memories, a couple of difficult times, anything really about your journey that you'd like to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Anirudh. Thank you very much for that question. I don't want this to be an interview that is more on my personal journey, so I'll keep it very short because you have more substantive issues to discuss. Let me say that my career has been that of an accidental corporate guy. I was not meant to be a corporate person. I am a trained economist from the Delhi School of Economics, and I was setting out to be a civil servant. That was because my family had a lot of people from the government, including my father himself, who was a technocrat. So that was the journey that I was on, and somewhere along the line, my path got deviated, and I joined Hindustan Lever, and then it is called now Hindustan Unilever, as a young management trainee, almost 42 years ago. So therefore, I've been working in the trenches for a long time. I must say that while initially I found myself a kind of outsider in a corporate world that had fundamentally the IITs and IIMs who were dominating, because 40 years ago they were the guys who were the ones who were part of large respected multinationals like HUL. But nevertheless, it has been a very, very satisfying journey. I have worked across three companies. I worked at HUL in different roles and capacities. I worked briefly for Colgate Palmolive, another wonderful company. And then now for the last 24 years, I've been with Nestle. And it has been a very, very happy, very inspiring, and a very productive journey as well. Working across different countries. I worked in Thailand and Indochina. I worked in Singapore. I worked in North Africa, Egypt, Libya, Sudan. I worked briefly in the Philippines. And then for the last 8 years now, I've been in India as the chairman and managing director of Nestle India. Been through different situations. I was part of when the Lehman Brothers crisis took place in 2008. I was in Singapore, so therefore I was part of that meltdown that happened there, and how to keep your body and soul together as a company, and how to keep your head above water was the main objective at that point in time. Was moved to North Africa before the Arab Spring, and within about 7 months of my going there, or in fact less than that, within about 5 months of my going there, the Arab Spring started. So there was an Indian in the Arab Spring in an Arabic-speaking country, not knowing the language, with internet cut, and with tanks outside the house. So that was a different journey in itself. So I've been through some exciting times, and then I thought all would be peaceful till I came back to India during the Maggie crisis, and that was an experience in itself. So in some sense, I have been the harbinger of either creating a crisis or falling into a crisis, as I put it. And so that's been my career. It has been very, very inspiring, because I've seen different cultures, different generations. I'm inspired by the Gen Z and by the millennials who now are the majority of my organization. I learn from them each day, and I look wondrously at the future leaders of this organization. Long after I'm gone, I'm very confident that this company would be in very safe hands of some outstanding leaders with competence, with wisdom, and with compassion. So let me leave it at that. So I'm a happy trooper. I always look at life positively, and that is what has kept me going. I am married. I am happily. I have a daughter who recently got married. So therefore, I am also a proud father-in-law now. And yes, we are a happy family, and we try and do the best that we can.
No, that's lovely. What a what a lovely way to give us a quick bird's eye view of your career and your personal journey. And I must say, as I heard you talking about the Lehman crisis and the Arab Spring, I thought you were invoking your inner diplomat or IFS officer uh, dreams that you might have had. And if your dream was to maybe be an IAS officer, then I'm sure in the course of this conversation as a policy think tank, we'll definitely invoke your inner policy maker hat also at some point in this conversation. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful to get a sense of how your journey has been, and the kind of countries and places and circumstances, both globally and internally at Nestle, you've gone through, managed so successfully. We obviously wanted to jump into the main theme we want to cover today, which is the role of the private sector in combating climate change. I think, as many of us know, the climate crisis is not something that can be handled by any one set of actors alone. Not governments alone, not the private sector alone, not international institutions alone, or not citizens alone. It will really require, without making it sound cliche, a whole of society and really whole of earth type effort. But as you hear these conversations happening at the COP negotiations, the IPCC reports that come out, the multilateral development banks and their meetings, the World Bank Spring meetings, you often get, as a lay person, you often get the sense that it's the governments that want to drive the agenda. Yet there are many individuals, most notably and most recently, one can quote Mr. Ajay Banga, who now heads the World Bank, who has mentioned how the private sector, especially on the finance side, has to play a critical role. Right. And my own thought on that also is that the role of the private sector has to go beyond just finance, and its role in, let's say, climate finance as a particular vertical of the climate action strategy the world needs to adopt, has to go much broader. So what I wanted to do was maybe first start off on, adopt a micro lens, talk about Nestle, and then maybe after that we'll zoom out later in the conversation, talk about the private sector more broadly. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about how Nestle is charting out its own strategy for the climate transition. How are you setting internal targets, internal strategies, internal sort of benchmarks, and really the strategy to execute on that?
So broadly, Anirudh, I completely subscribe to the thought process and indeed what you shared. I think while governments have an overarching role in terms of developing policies, prescriptions, and actions to mitigate climate change, and while we can perennially have the debate on whether we are depriving the developing countries of the growth opportunity by asking them to mitigate climate change when the more developed countries have had the benefit of this economic growth. I mean, that will always be a interesting geopolitical economic debate that will take place. I firmly believe that corporates also have actions that they can take, and I don't think we can be spectators at this party. We have to be participants in it. At Nestle, indeed, I believe that companies where sustainability is part of the DNA of the organization tend to do much better. And I believe that at Nestle, we are blessed, and I'm blessed to work in an organization where sustainability has been part of the DNA. The founding father, Henri Nestle, set up this business with the partnership of farmers, with the attention to the best quality and safety that products could give, and he called it Nestle. He gave his own personal name to it. This has spawned partnerships across dairy industry, partnerships across coffee farmers, spice farmers, and different agricultural entities across the world. Long before sustainability became a word, even in the lexicon that is being used now across boardrooms and wherever. So, as a company, I think this has been articulated very well in the last couple of years, where we have definitive strategies. While Anirudh, only 5% of emissions are directly attributable to operations of the company, 95% is really what we would call scope 2 and scope 3, which is because of the value chain and because of the extended value chain. Nevertheless, we have got very clear objectives. I think the objective for us is that by 2025 that we reduce the carbon emissions by 20%, 50% by 2030, and net zero by 2050. I think this is a very clearly defined objective for us, and this is what we are working towards. Divided into 3 or 4 streams. One stream is the sustainable sourcing stream, whether it is oils, whether it is coffee, whether it is spices, whether it is milk, whether it is regenerative agriculture. This is one big part of it. The second has to do with packaging and the use of plastics. The third is in terms of the energy quotient, renewable energies, and how we can improve this quotient as we move along. And finally, of course, integrating our brands. And as you know, Nestle has globally 2,000 brands plus, and trying to integrate the brands onto the sustainability journey. So this is really the 3 or 4 pieces of sustainability and climate change that are an integral part of the business operations of all the Nestle operations across the world. So therefore, this is not a head office initiative of the executive board and the CEO. It is an initiative that is cascaded to countries. So in India, as part of this plan, I have a steering committee that is headed by me as the chairman and managing director. It has my management leadership team members who are personally sponsoring various parts of it. So what does this mean? For example, let me take the sourcing part of it, sustainable sourcing.
Can I ask you one question before we go into the 4 pillars? The at the global level, obviously, there's this whole argument that India and many other developing countries make, that you also alluded to, of common but differentiated responsibilities, right? Given the historical background that you also alluded to, is that somehow also playing out in a global organization like Nestle? Like, as you think about these targets that you just laid out for 2050 and the intermediary targets, are your operations and suppliers in developing countries being given longer periods to adjust to these targets, and shorter targets for, let's say, suppliers and farmers in developed countries? Or how is that common but differentiated responsibility piece maybe playing out within Nestle globally, given you span so many countries?
See, I think one of the things that works, Anirudh, is that in the developed world, some of these initiatives are already well underway. So, therefore, for example, whether it is in plastics, or it is in environment, or it is in renewable energy, or it is in agricultural practices, these have already been in play well before some of the objectives of the company have been set as far as climate change is concerned. So therefore, they have a bit of a head start in terms of the progress that they can make, and they can control as far as some of these initiatives are concerned. However, the company is very, very, very fair. We look at what we call the big ticket items, which are the areas where we can make the most significant impact in a period of time, and where is it that we can get the best return on the monies and resources that are spent. Because as you know well, Anirudh, sustainability and climate change costs money. The consumers are not willing. They are appreciative of companies that follow the path and are sensitive and cognizant of efforts that are being made. But if you tell the consumer that you're going to pay 2 rupees more simply because I'm doing a sustainability initiative, they will say we'll find some other brand. So therefore, what we look at is really looking at those initiatives where the company, the context of the country, the available technologies can bring the necessary heft to make the reductions happen. So each of the elements that I talked about will have a composite element that adds up to that 20% reduction by 2025. But which countries will do what kind of initiatives would vary. For example, in India, initiatives around plastics, initiative around dairy, initiative around coffee, initiatives around spices are important initiatives as far as the company is concerned. But my colleagues in Europe, for example, will not be working on some of these projects. They would look more at things like renewable energy, look at the reduction of plastics, or some other projects that are more relevant to their environment and to their context. And that's how we manage it as a global company. But I think one of the beauties of our system is that no one is let off the hook. So I cannot take the plea saying that in COP26, there was a plea by the Indian government saying that, and maybe from a government perspective, that particular plea makes sense in terms of the energies that we need in order to grow the economies. It's a fair point, but as far as I'm concerned, that is not an excuse that I can take. I am part of Nestle. I am part of the sustainability and climate change kind of promise of the company. And therefore, I will bring to the table what I think I can contribute to this particular cause.
No, absolutely, and I think that what's very interesting. I think that's one very interesting to see, right? That the way corporates will navigate this um, process as a global corporate like you are will be very different than how maybe governments will position themselves or navigate the negotiations at forums like COP. The other interesting piece that, if I may ask you about, is that you look at Nestle, and I'm quite familiar with Nestle over time. I've spent a fair bit working with and studying the CPG or the consumer products and FMCG industry over my own career. And one of the things I find very interesting about Nestle is its focus on science and R&D. And I want to dig into that a little bit, if I may. This book, I think we might have spoken briefly when we last met over dinner, was in my book called The Great Tech Game. One of the things I talk about is for India and for really any country to succeed in the kind of tech dominated era that we live in, right? Where tech is really the new engine of economic growth, is the new wealth of nations. The key capability that I pointed to was R&D. Right? If you look at countries or corporations that have succeeded over the last, I would say, several decades across the world, you'll find one common element amongst the top 50, 100 companies that's not talked about enough, which is their emphasis on R&D. And I believe Nestle is, again, an excellent example of a global conglomerate that has managed to keep R&D at its core and science at its core. Right. So picking off on that, I wanted to ask you, one, what is this science-based approach to targets that Nestle speaks about, one? And second, what role do you see for R&D more broadly within the private sector, or at least sponsored or funded by the private sector, in solving the bigger technological challenges that we face in our climate journey?
Sure. I think it's a very good question, Anirudh. I think firstly, as Nestle, we are arguably the single largest investor in the food space as far as R&D is concerned. Almost close to $1.5 to $2 billion are spent each year across about 35 R&D centers, employing almost 5,000 scientists. They are working on different categories, different product solutions, all of it on a sustainable platform, on a platform where the benefits of contemporary science and technology is brought to the product and to the offering. So that's number one. If you look at some of the initiatives that I am doing in India, for example, I'll just take 2 or 3 examples of what is being done. We have today, and indeed for the last couple of years, a proprietary technology called ZERAU, ZEREAU, or as in of water in French. So the ZERAU initiative is a patented technology that utilizes the water in the liquid milk for the maintenance activities of the plant. So therefore, at our plant in Moga, we use the water that comes out because most of our products are powder based, and therefore we take out the milk. So rather than take out the milk and do nothing with it, we have used the technology to use the water in the milk for the maintenance activities, and thereby we have reduced the draw of water from groundwater by 20%. So that's a direct benefit to the environment because, as you know very well, Anirudh, one of the most stressed states in India on water is Punjab because of the agrarian revolution there. And because of the rice and wheat, which are water-intensive crops, there is a huge stress on water, and therefore that is something that we are trying to mitigate. Dairying is one of the biggest sources of methane emission as far as the value chain is concerned. Across the world, wherever there are dairy farms, they are sources of methane because of the cows that are there. Today, we are pioneering in the private sector the installation of biodigesters as far as the utilization of animal waste is concerned. We are able to generate energy to energize the operations of the dairy farms. We are using it for household consumption, and the slurry is used as natural fertilizer to help in the regenerative agriculture that we are proponents of, and where Nestle is signing on to in a reasonably significant way. So thereby, what is happening is the technology itself is, and this technology extends also to feed. There are feed technologies today that gives you the benefit of solutions that make the digestive system more amenable as far as nutrients are concerned and cause less emissions. So whether it is nutrition, whether it is feed, whether it is veterinary science, whether it is biodigesters, these are all areas where Nestle is building the expertise in order to implement it at scale. Now, this typically means that you move from small farms, which is 1 or 2 cow farms, to larger farms. And therefore, that journey also is being enabled to move to larger farms, because larger farms have per capita a lower emission of methane as compared to smaller farms. So this will take a long time. So it's not going to it's not going to revolutionize the country immediately, but these are steps that are important. The second plant that I wanted to talk to you about was the coffee plant. We have a sustainable program of coffee, which is called 4C, which is called the Common Code for the Coffee Community. That's what the 4C stands for. This is sustainability programs across 3,500 farmers in the southern states where coffee is grown. We are giving them the best practices in soil conservation, in water utilization, in minimizing the use of pesticide. As a consequence of this, we are getting coffee from these farmers. Almost 60% to 70% of our coffee is sourced from these farmers, and we pay them 3 rupees per kilogram extra for this, because it is an effort to make this coffee also sustainable. So every time you drink a cup of Nescafe, you can be rest assured that you are actually supporting and you are subscribing to the cause of climate change. And I think this is an important initiative that we've rolled out. Similarly, in the
So can I ask you, of the 2 billion you're spending, right? These are wonderful wonderful sort of R&D initiatives that you've outlined. And I know we spoke about millets as well when we last spoke. So I want to come back to the millets question also, maybe a little bit later in the conversation. But on the R&D piece, you mentioned $2 billion roughly about a year that Nestle spends globally on R&D. How much of that would, maybe, if you can give us some kind of estimate, be applicable only? I imagine some are company wide, right? Many of those initiatives would be company wide, but some of the ones that are maybe India specific, what kind of spend do you think Nestle India could be said to be allocating to R&D specifically for Indian consumers or Indian producers or suppliers?
It'll be difficult to link it up on specific programs that are India related, because India then applies the global technologies that are developed. So we are recipients of this because we are a subsidiary of Nestle SA. So we are recipients of the technologies and the capabilities that the Nestle group develops. So it's a bit difficult for me to say which part of it was meant for India, because it is developed and then rolled out to all countries where this technology is developed. India is a recipient in coffee, India is a recipient in spices, India is a recipient as far as dairy technologies are concerned.
The reason I'm asking also, I understand that it's very hard to break it down maybe by the geographic split I was referring to. But the reason I was asking this question leads to a slightly bigger question I wanted to ask you, which is related to this R&D piece. One of the key observations that many policymakers now have made, many writers on the question of R&D have made, scientists have made, is that India, compared to other countries, spends a very, very small chunk of its GDP, 0.6 to 0.7% of its GDP to be more precise, on R&D, Most of it is being spent by pharma companies, by the way. So the bulk of this 0.6% in absolute terms will be spent by pharma companies in India trying to develop often generic drugs as well. Whereas the remainder of the economy, the private sector, is not spending that much. I don't have the exact numbers, but that number is more likely to be in the range of 0.1 to 0.2% is my random guess right now. But you look at companies like Nestle or even countries like the US, Korea, Taiwan, countries that are ahead in the technological race, economically speaking, you find that those countries are spending upwards of 3 to 4% of their GDP on R&D. You look at certain companies, at least in the tech space that I spend most of my time in, companies are spending up to 10% of their turnover on R&D, and that seems to be a source of competitive advantage. But you look at India, it seems to be missing, both at the government level and the private sector level. Why is that, according to you? You've worked in the Indian corporate sector now for a long time. You have probably many colleagues who are working for both Indian FMCG firms as well as Indian offices of global firms. Why is it that the Indian private sector is not spending more on R&D?
I think one of the one is of course the entire scientific temper and the link between science and outcomes that can be had both in the public space and in the private space. That probably is still a little bit weak. It's one of the areas in India which can certainly enhance and make for better utilization and better deployment of R&D resources is what I call the public-private collaboration, the PPP arrangements that can be called. Those are few and far between. I think some of our scientific establishments are doing a lot of research, but none of this really is in consonance with private enterprise wherever relevant. I'm not saying that some of the highly sensitive defense research doesn't need to be percolated to private enterprise. But some of the other research, for example, on agriculture or on processing or on any of the other things like contaminants or food safety or things like that, can certainly be done with a public-private partnership. I think this.
What's stopping it today? What's preventing it from happening today?
Everyone feels kind of comfortable in the space in which they are in. I think the compelling reasons of competitiveness and compulsion hasn't yet taken over. And I presume that will one day. Because most of the companies, if you look at it, the export-led growth countries like Korea and a few others have had this relationship between the government establishments and the private enterprise. If you look at Japan, for example, again, the links have been very, very strong. I think context and compulsion make for these partnerships to happen. I must say that there are, for example, we have, as a company, now tied up with the Indian Institute of Millet Research, for example. They have got a project called NutriHub, which is looking at millet processing, millet products, and millet cultivation. And we have tied up with them as the Nestle research, which is based in India, which is a global entity of the company, has tied up with the Indian Institute of Millet Research. We are looking at other such initiatives as well. I must say, Anirudh, that this has been greatly welcomed by the Indian Institute of Millet Research. And in fact, I must say in all fairness, that they were equally enthusiastic about it because they said, look, somebody is giving, is lending voice to the work that we are doing. And we said, look, we are happy because we are a nutrition company. We believe in the power of millets, and we will be happy to look at ways and means of improving cultivation, including improving processing. Because one of the challenges in millets is the processing of millets. And that again, Nestle has got some expertise globally, and the Indian Institute of Millet Research has also got some expert locally. So therefore, there is a possibility. I think inertia is on both sides. I will not say that private sector has suddenly snapped out of its kind of slumber and said we should have tie-ups. Neither has the government sector suddenly said we should not have it. I think wherever there is meaningful steps which are being taken, I think such arrangements can be worked out.
Yeah, and I think they'll be critical. I mean, in a country like India, where as you mentioned, both from a nutrition standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, you mentioned the water intensive crops that are being grown in many states, and farmers are reliant on those particular crops that are water intensive, that then drain the ground water levels to unsustainable levels. Or you can talk about it even from a health standpoint. Um, you know, you I think serve on the CI committee for food processing as well. And one of the questions that is always there with rising incidence of diseases that are arising from overconsumption of over processed foods, right? We've moved over the last few generations, I feel, even in India, away from the fresh, local, seasonal food diets that we used to have, to more packaged food, more processed food, and that's eventually showing up and will start to show up more and more in the incidence of diseases, right, amongst the population. So I think from various standpoints, it's very important that the kind of research that can be done collaboratively between the public and the private sector should be done on a war footing, because millets, you mentioned, obviously the prime minister has announced it as the year of the millets. There's a policy push towards it. We know that millets are hardier, don't need as much water, of course. And India is a good source of many of these millet crops, right? Historically, even before wheat and rice, people say Indians have been consuming millets. So there's obviously a lot of value possibly there to do the research. I think the kind of initiatives that you've mentioned, you embarked on, and seems like various challenges, right? Both from a funding, inertia, mindset, maybe capabilities on both sides, maybe unfamiliarity of capabilities on both sides that need to be resolved. I'm sure you're familiar that the cabinet has also passed a bill recently about the National Science Foundation to push further R&D. I know the Principal Scientific Advisor's office is also trying to do a lot of work to facilitate this kind of joint collaboration. So
No, I think it's a good step. It's a good step. Anirudh, the only perspective I would like to add is, while there is a lot of emphasis on fresh food and freshly cooked food, it's all good, and I think it's scientifically valid and also true. But the fact is, providing for food security would still entail packaged foods because of the question of shelf life and of the distances that products have to go. And still, we have not cracked that code of being able to take fresh food across to every home and give them great content. So therefore, I think this balanced perspective, I'm not talking about over processed food, but certainly as far as processed food is concerned and what some of the other better nutrients can bring to the table, needs to be dispassionately discussed from the point of view not just of what is idealistic, but what is pragmatic. I mean, the fact is that when somebody is hungry for a roti in a village, and he needs to buy that atta from a packet, he needs to buy that atta from a packet. I mean, he doesn't have the chakki and he doesn't have the wheat crop to be able to help it get the fresh flour as far as the product is concerned. So I think this needs to be seen in perspective, but I understand the overall context that the comment is being made.
no, absolutely. I think a balanced approach where you have multiple socio-economic, political, as well as health challenges. It has to be a mixed approach over time, right? That you transition towards. Um, and that's a good segue into the other question I wanted to now get into, which is the scope for private and public sector. We've spoken a little bit about obviously Nestle and the private sector and its role in the climate transition. I want to now talk about how the two, the public and the private, can collaborate or work together in solving the climate issue that's at hand. And also, more specifically, from your perspective, what are the key regulatory, policy, technological, financial hurdles that you anticipate in such collaboration, right? Or even where you feel some kind of unlocking from a policy standpoint could help you expedite your own transition at Nestle.
Look, I think it's a good question, but a few things that we need to kind of have on the table. Firstly, for the projects which are long gestation, needing a lot of capital. For example, the whole dairy revolution that we're talking about will need considerable amount of not only science but also progress in terms of financing. I think this is where Indian financial institutions, along with multilateral agencies, needs to come together to help in this transition. Because if we have to transition dairy into the new world of climate friendly or relatively climate friendly industry, and dairy, as you know, we are the world's biggest milk producers. So we have a vested interest as far as dairy and dairy farming is concerned. I think between policy, between technology, and also financing, there needs to be a closer cooperation that needs to be done. As far as the regulatory framework is concerned, I don't think there are too many impediments. I think on the regulatory front, what is really important is the usage of ingredients, the usage of technologies, the quality and safety standards, and calibrating ourselves as a country to what is possible by us. Just taking international standards and slapping them onto the Indian packs is not going to work, because the fact is that we are at different stages of the technology cycle in terms of sophistication, knowledge, and application as far as these things are concerned. So I think these are some of the things that we can certainly do. I'm very happy that the government is quite receptive as far as some of the suggestions are concerned on the regulatory frameworks. I think on what can be done as far as dairying is concerned, more discussion would need to be involved, because the fact is that India still is a country of small dairy farmers. Most of the farmers, it's like land holding, 80-85% is less than 2 hectares. Similarly, most of the dairy farms are 1 or 2 cows, and we are able to get scale benefit of climate change only when the farms become slightly bigger, which means that we have to upgrade and help the farmers to upgrade. You can't just tell a farmer, you've got 2 cows now, you have 5 cows tomorrow. Where's he going to find the money? And each cow is going to set him back by at least 50,000 rupees to a lakh of rupees. So it's not small money as far as these farmers are concerned.
Absolutely. And let me now transition to maybe a slightly broader question that I want to conclude with, which is, now if I was to have you take off your Nestle hat for a second, take it off for a second, and think about it now from a India strategy standpoint. Now, as as these big transitions take place in the world, any kind of transitions that create economic opportunity, right? Whether it was the industrial revolution and the tech revolution, etc. There's often opportunities that are there for countries to grab, right? We've spoken about Korea, Taiwan, countries like that really benefited over the last 30, 40, 50 years from the globalization of supply chains, for example, and they tapped that opportunity and benefited from it. Now, as we see climate as an opportunity for a second, we've spoken of it in challenge terms, of course, but as an opportunity, where do you see, Mr. Narayanan, India having certain maybe pockets of great opportunity that, if tapped, could position India and Indian corporates, Indian private sector as leaders globally in certain, either it could be certain sectors, it could be certain technologies in the broader climate space? What's your viewpoint on that, sort of foresight on that?
I think I just would like to make 2 or 3 points. Number one, I think India is, and I genuinely believe that we have walked with leadership as far as the climate change debate is concerned. I think we have not only talked about what impedes us, but we have also talked about what can progress us. I think India's opportunity as far as renewable sources of energy is concerned is huge. I mean, we already have invested quite a bit in renewable energy, including things like clean hydrogen and others. We will become, I believe, with some effort, one of the biggest hubs as far as renewable energy is concerned. I think renewable energy and cleaning up the energy sector is clearly one big contribution that India can make not only to our own economy, but also as far as the world economy is concerned. The second piece I believe we have got is really on renewable agriculture. It's a long journey. We still are using a lot of fertilizers, so therefore we have to make the transition quite quite reasonable and quite pragmatic. We don't want to land up with the issue that some of our neighboring countries have had when they have cut out fertilizers, suddenly the yields crashing and them having a food sustainability issue. But I think agriculture and dairy is clearly an area where India can also make its contribution. But overall terms, I think India is bringing maturity to the debate. From whatever I've read, I've not seen shrill statements being made that deny us the capability or the capacity or indeed the willingness to be part of the climate change journey. I think these 2 or 3 opportunities would really help us to make the mark that we want to, and hopefully improve our own environment. Because I think if you look at Anirudh, the millennial research that we did some time back, the 3 most important requirements of the millennials or the Gen Z today is clean water, clean air, and clean food. I think these are the basics is really what the people are praying for, and I think that's possible if you are able to take these steps.
Yeah, and I'll add just one thing on that point before we conclude, which is, I think India, from a agriculture standpoint that you mentioned, it's very critical that India develop obviously agri technology, biotechnology, alternative fertilizers, etc., to meet its own requirements. But at the same time, I think as supply chains get reimagined now, both because of geopolitical reasons, but even otherwise, as we make the climate transition and the whole economic basis of our production maybe transforms because of that imperative, very critical for India to think very hard about pretty much each sector, major sector, and think about where in that overall global supply chain, will India find its own role or its own indispensability? And that's really where my own sense is that that's really where wealth generation then will start to happen. We can be very well consumers of renewable energy technology being built and manufactured, developed and IP owned elsewhere. But unless we start to focus on developing that IP ourselves, at least in some sectors, I think that we'll end up remaining users of technology and adopters, but not necessarily developers or producers of it.
No, I think you're making a valid point, Anirudh, because what we can bring to the table is also technology, and I think use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, drone technologies, and others, we are pretty good at. I mean, as a country, we have got some expertise here, and being the 5th largest economy now in the world, and also the largest population in the world, whatever difference we can make to the climate will make a difference to the world. Because it's a no-brainer to look at it that way. And therefore, while there is a long path ahead, there is, I believe, Anirudh, I at least would like to believe that there is room for optimism in terms of the journey that we can traverse as a country. And also certainly as a company, Nestle can traverse that journey as well.
And on that optimistic note, let me thank you, Mr. Narayanan. We've run out of time for our conversation today, but it's been absolutely fascinating. I think we've covered a lot of topics and lots of different perspectives that you've helped us look at. So thank you for sharing all of that, taking the time, and we look forward to continue to engaging with you over time.
Thank you, Anirudh. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for this opportunity, for the conversation, and for the stimulation and the inspiration that you have provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Narayanan. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and our team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.